Oh, good morning, beautiful people. I don't know if we're back yet. I think we are. The music stopped. I'm Babz Rawls-Ivy. Welcome to the second hour of LoveBabz, Love Talk. Are we live, Harry?
Yep, we're live.
So I'm excited and delighted because guess who is going to be my guest right now? So Emily Bernard was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. She holds a BA and a PhD in American Studies from Yale University. Her work has appeared in the TLS, the American Scholar, the New Republic, the New Yorker, the Yale Review, Harper's, O Magazine, Boston Globe Magazine, Creative Nonfiction, Green Mountain Review, Oxford American, and Plowshares. Her essays have been reprinted in Best American Essays, Best African American Essays, and Best of Creative Nonfiction. Her first book, Remember Me to Harlem, The Letters of Langston Hughes and Carl Van Vechten. I have that, actually. It's one of my favorites books. Was a New York Times Notable Book of the Year. And her most recent book, Black is the Body, Stories from My Grandmother's Time, My Mother's Time, and Mine. It won the 2020 LA Times Isher Wood Prize for autobiographical prose. And she has received fellowships and grants from Yale University, Harvard University, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Vermont Arts Council, the Vermont Studio Center, and the MacDowell Colony. A contributing editor at the American Scholar, Emily is the Julian Lindsay Green and Gold Professor of English at the University of Vermont. A 2020 Andrew Carnegie Fellow, she lives in South Burlington, Vermont, with her husband, John Gennari, and their twin daughters. So is she in the guest room, Harry?
No, she's not.
Oh, where is she? Oh, she's coming. She just texted me. She has tech delays. And she has a set of beautiful twins who are just beautiful. So anyway, when she comes on, I can tell you how I met her and how we are connected. Like I'm connected to her before I even knew her by friends who I adore far and wide, which is the most amazing thing. I love the way my life is so serendipitous. It really is. My life is so serendipitous, Harry. I know people like I know the same people that she knows that I didn't even know that I knew until just recently, which is amazing to me. So I can't wait to come. I was trying to find her book, Harry, because I have her book in my house. And this my house is where books go to die, I think. Oh, there she is. So I'm gonna let her in. Well.
Hello. I'm so
Good
sorry.
morning.
How are you?
Oh, girl, you're not late. You're just on time. You look beautiful.
Okay. Well, I got dressed up for you.
I mean, you always look so sultry. Like you look like you stepped out of some magazine from some Caribbean romance. Like you always look like that. I was like, gosh, some women just always look like they're ready to have sex, and some of us aren't, right? Like
that is the best compliment I've ever received.
No, you look like you're one of those women that's always ready to have sex. I mean, your hair, your affect, and I just try to show up as best I can, but you just show up looking amazing.
Listen, I'm good. How about you? I love your background. That's where is that where you do your business, or were you?
Yes,
relax?
This is a corner in my dining room. Cool. Like if I move this laptop, you would see the tragedy of. The tragedy of an unpacked space.
I understand you.
I love your books behind you. It is said that that people who have books as people have books that are close to them are the most brilliant of people. And I heard that on a talk a few weeks ago. My girlfriend Ife had some authors on, and they were talking about the proximity of books, and I believe that when you have books around you, it is their proximity to brilliance. So yeah.
I like that. That's reassuring. Because yes. I'm also looking at a tragedy around me too. I just carved out this little space. You can see this chaos.
That's the good thing about this Zoom life. I was like, all right, That's how much I want people to see.
Right.
They can fit in this little box. So how are you in Vermont?
Well, let me tell you, it's a beautiful day, and we're getting this beautiful sunshine, whereas usually we have to wait until late April for any sign of spring.
Is it
So
snowing?
I guess it is not. It is this. I think it's all fog. No, I see some little bits across the street, but it's Vermont, so people are out in their light jackets and 34 degrees. Woohoo!
And you're just a little Tennessee girl all the way in Vermont.
Always, always. I mean, it's just. I tell you, when my daughters want to go out in 50-degree weather in short sleeves, I just can't believe it because it is in my bones. I will never think of that as warm weather.
Me too. Me
Yeah,
too. And I'm from Connecticut, but my roots are very much south. And so I feel like my body is remembering that. And
I
so
totally get that.
the older I get, the more I can't tolerate this Yankee weather. And
Yeah,
I'm a Yankee, but I can't tolerate it.
yeah.
So Emily, when did you know you wanted to be a writer? When did you know you were a writer?
I've been writing. I've been aspiring to be a writer since I was pretty young. My mother was a poet, and I grew up with her writing her poetry. In the when women do. She'd wake up at 4:30 in the morning and to iron, and I would find her sometimes with her basket of ironing and just reading and writing. She sat at her desk and she was very devoted to the maintenance of the household and raising her kids and being the proper wife, but she always found corners of time to make her art, and it became more important to her as she got older. And we grew up. My grandmother was also a poet too. I mean, she wrote, for the church newsletter.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's a whole maternal line. I think I really just inherited this hunger, and I feel inspired by my grandmother and mother all the time. But when I was young, just an example of my mother, I saw very early on how poets are made of labor, and patience and dedication.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I started writing consciously in high school. I wrote stories and I wrote very elaborate journal entries full of teenage angst, which actually served me really well today because when I'm trying to write about the past, I have these great journals where I can go back and remember those emotions,
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty early when I started to practice writing, and I so much wanted to be a writer. In graduate school, I had to kind of swallow a lot of that hunger, that primal hunger, because I had to learn a new language. In graduate school, it's all about dissecting text. So I buried my love of books without meaning to, because there was, it wasn't seen as important, believe it or not. Appreciating literature and the reading experience was something when I was in graduate school that was not seen as important. In fact, kind of looked down on.
Really?
Yeah. I think it's a different moment now. I think graduate school the whole process has changed. But when I was a graduate student, it's very clear. In fact, I would get the backhanded compliments from some of my peers who would say, "Emily, your writing is so clear," and that wasn't that was saying something else.
They were throwing shade.
They were throwing shade. And then even when I started my career as a professor, some of my colleagues marveled at the fact that I was a reader first. I mean, one colleague I remember saying, "Wow, you really read this stuff for pleasure. You actually read stuff, and so it took writers in my department who saw a kinship in me, and in so many English departments around the country, there's a segregation. The scholars are here and the creative writers are here, but that wasn't the case where I'm teaching now. So I was able to learn from the creative writers who just pushed me past my fear, and inspired me with courage, and the courage to really speak in the voice that I wanted to speak in, that my mother had taught me as a child, that I've been working on it since I was a kid.
Mm-hmm. And so the book that I have of yours, which I do have, it's so funny. I do have the Remember Me to Harlem book before I even knew you.
Wow.
Like I had this book because I am fascinated with the Harlem Renaissance, and I'm fascinated with letter writing, and I'm fascinated between the friendship that transpired between Carl and Langston. Um,
Yeah.
and I was just enamored of that. So I had no idea who you were. I didn't know you. And I don't even, I think I know you because Karen Walton, Dr. Karen DeBose
That's
Walton.
right.
You must have been on campus, or you must have been speaking at something. And she must have said to me, "Oh, I know her," or "I'm friends with her." And I was like, "Oh my God, blah, 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 blah. Can you connect me?" And then
Yeah.
we connected, and then we went to lunch, and it's been a great love story ever
It
since.
really has been. It really has been. I think we just both identified kindred spirits in each other. And it's one reason why, social media can work when you can reach out to people and just say, hey, I want to get to know you. And, that's a wonderful thing about living in these
Yes,
days.
yes.
Yeah.
And all the ugliness of social media,
Right.
there are some gems and pearls that jump out, that at least for me, it has been to have these kinds of relationships, because I would never be in Vermont walking down the street and run into you. Like it just wouldn't happen, right? So
Yeah.
to connect here is good. I love that book. Talk to me about your need and desire to write How Wide the Body, right? Did I say it right?
It's black as the body.
Black is
Well, I tell you what, I think in some ways they're related. Although it took me a while to figure that out, to be honest with you, because
really.
I've just been moving. Yeah, I've just been moving on instinct through this whole writing path. I just I just get interested in things and just have to follow it to the end. So that's how the first book started. Honestly, it was one of those books that I remember the editor saying, "This doesn't exist already." I think I'm good at identifying books that are kind of obvious, but nobody's done them yet. So, I remember, and actually, that was a turning point for me, as you can imagine. I was actually working for a literary agent at the time, and I kept seeing all these proposals come through and thinking, God, I have a book. These letters I've always been interested in, just like you, correspondence, intimacy through French, through letter writing. And I remember a friend of mine saying, "This is your book. If you don't do it, somebody else will. So that's your choice." So I did. I wrote it, and I've always been interested in Carl van Vechten. I've always been interested in that intimacy. I think for me, that motivates me through all of my writing.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that you can come to know people in such a variety of ways. I feel close to Langston and Carl because of the having the chance to rifle around in their personal letters. I
And
feel I have a
personal
glimpse of
letter
them.
writing was a big deal. I mean, I got my letter writing vibe from my grandmother, because she would travel. She would do a lot of traveling around the country, and she had a stationery case with all her stamps and pretty stationery and perfumes for the paper. And so that's how and she would just write people all over the country, and she would say, "Oh, I'm coming out to California," or "I'm coming to," and then they would write back, and they would so that's how my fondness for letter writing came into existence. So I imagine that people would pour out their hearts um, in letters in ways that we take for granted, in the ways that we talk on the phone or text or email these days.
I agree. And I think people wonder what's going to happen to that art now. But I always remind myself that that's what people wondered about when the phone was introduced. What's going to happen to letter writing? What's going to happen to face-to-face contact? So we'll find a way, I think, to make that bridge between old-fashioned correspondence and writing of emails. And now so many archives are taking writers' hard drives so they can sort through. But I, like you, yes, I always have found that really interesting, and the care. I mean, I had the same kind of mother who, wrote out drafts of letters on her onion skin paper with carbon, before with perfect penmanship, because she had learned that in school. So I think I was also fascinated by the art of it.
Yeah.
And but
Yeah.
but I must say that what interested in me with thinking about Black as a Body, again, intimacy and the kind of quiet nature of personal revolutions, the way that friendships and relationships can change us I've always been interested in that. We talk about racism as a structural problem, but a systemic issue. But I cling to the belief people make up systems. It has to be a two-pronged attack on the problem, both on the policy level and also in the parlor, around the dining room table. We have to be willing to challenge our friends and our relatives. And that's how change transpired. I know this from personal experience. I grew up in the Bible Belt. And, there are things that, I can't believe the things I not only said, but believed about homosexuality when I was growing up. It was just a common parlance. All the language that we know today is rhetorical violence. That was what we use. And my mother grew up in a religious home, and she had those views about sexuality and the sanctity of marriage between men and women. But when I went to college and I met people with broader views, it changed me forever.
And that's
having
what
those
college should do, right?
Isn't
that what college should do? At least that's what it did for me. But you seem uniquely a person for intimacy. Like, I can't imagine that you would have frivolous conversations. Like, I imagine you to be one of these people that could that every conversation you have would feel very sort of one-on-one and intimate, because I see your writing feels that way to me. Like you don't shy away from showing us these quiet spaces that we can dwell in. Like, you seem to be at home in these very personal spaces. I don't know. Am I captured? Does that seem
Oh,
accurate?
absolutely. And thank you, because I feel like thank you for being a careful reader of that book, and for understanding that. I'll never forget, when I was in college, I read For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow's Enough. And I remember reading, there's one line in that book, in that play, one of the characters says, "I still crave close talk and understanding," or close talk and vulnerability. And it so struck me. I felt such a kinship with that character and the book and what it was about. Just after that particular, character had lost a relationship, and still saying, "I still crave that. I still need it." And I think that hunger I identify with, to know people, to believe in human complexity. To me, it's a great gift. I love being surprised by people. I miss that about being out in the world, because sometimes those, even the random encounters, can just surprise you and open things up and make you hopeful and make you believe. So I think that's what I'm always chasing in all of the writing I'm doing, just the sensation, the experience of knowing someone else. How is that achieved? Is it achieved in conversation? Is it achieved with living with people? Is it achieved in working with people, living next to them, around the table, that intimacy? Is it also possible when you're working with the dead? Carl von Beckton said, when he was 80 years old, there are people who are dead I'm closer to than people who are alive. And I remember reading that, 20 years ago myself, and thinking that must be true. I believe that. I think that is what I am myself working toward. And that's why I spend time in these archives, because the surprise of finding somebody who lived 100 years before you were born, and feeling that kinship, thinking, my goodness, there really is a common human experience. Yes. That to me is always, I never get over it.
Yes. Yeah. Now, you are a wife and a mom. How does that play into the way that you write, the way that you see the world? Do you see the world differently because of those relationships?
I think so. And I have said and believe that I have become a better writer as I have become, hopefully, a better mother. Certainly, I've learned a lot about both, just through failing and through trial and error. I just said to my daughter this morning, my daughter Isabella, we had a moment last night. And I just said, you know what, you really teach me to be your mother. There's no blueprint for this, of course, as we all know, and the complexity of, being an adoptive mother, as you and I have bonded over, it's its own journey, and you have to figure it out on your own. So, or through with being in the family on the job. So, it's a learning process. Of course, I think a lot of people who love their work, a lot of women who love their work, you worry, can I do both? Can I do? I remember reading Maria Shriver gave a commencement speech at, I think, Columbia or Barnard many years ago. And she said that her mother Eunice had told her, you can have everything, but you can't have it all at once.
Mhm.
And I've used that as a kind of guiding principle to just, sometimes you're just a mother, right? Sometimes you're just a parent, you're just a guide. That's what you have to have time for and prioritize. And sometimes you can prioritize being an artist. And I think it's a constant negotiation.
I think so. I
mhm.
don't, there's no other, I mean, an adopted mother and then Black adoptive mother, that's a whole other stratosphere. But you're right, there are no road maps for that. There's no road maps for motherhood, period. But when you adopt children that don't share your DNA, don't have your history, don't have any of that, and you have to create that from the ground up. I mean, it is a lonely road sometimes, joyful and stressful, but still lonely, I think.
Absolutely. Yes.
Still lonely, so.
Yeah.
So what were you like before being a wife and a mother? What was your?
Wow, that's a great question. I must say, to be probably boring, it was always to become a writer. I didn't know how to go about that. I didn't know what kind of writer I could become. I didn't know if I could make a living from it. But that was always my goal. And I think I always wanted a family. I think like many of us, we have these legacies, and my mother and her sisters all had really hard marriages. And yet I clung to this fantasy. But I think there was some way that I was on the, in a practical way, just very, very suspicious of that whole thing, and and my husband says I had to be dragged to the altar. But in some ways,
I'm with you.
Yeah, you know what I mean? He said on that day, he was like worried I was not going to come. I love that about him, that he accepted that possible fate and still wanted to marry me. He has a sense of humor about life. But I think being in a family has given me the necessary structure. It has enabled some maturing. I think I have a slow learning curve in some ways. I'm the kind of person who has to learn her lessons the hard way. And so, this has been a growing up time. And my parents have both passed away. So there's that, as a friend of mine said, when your parents pass away, that umbrella over you is just gone.
Yes.
And that means you can also see the sky a little more clearly. You have to invent that sky, but it makes you aware of your mortality, of course. And I think that is fed my writing in really productive ways. I just finished a long essay about Audre Lorde that's, as you know, just coming out in the New Republic. I'm so excited.
Yes.
And
yes.
she talked about, I loved reading the cancer journals in particular. I wish I'd read that book years ago. I think I was scared of reading it, the cancer journals, but what an amazing and really, frankly, very sexy book. Just a ferocity of her writing and her attention to sex and the erotic and just insisting on that. But she said that with her diagnosis, her first, she had cancer 3 times. It sharpened her determination to get things down on the page, to understand something more about life, to articulate about her more precisely her experience. I so understand that. And I think, again, not a comparison, of course, but just understanding that the time is now, thinking about my mother and her lessons at the end of her life. She always encouraged me to think about work. In fact, she was really, because of her own experience, wanted me to put work first. And I'm so grateful to that she understood the cost to a woman's life, to her own life, by foregrounding that fantasy of being the perfect wife. And, in the end, we all have to face ourselves. We have to go to that final resting place alone. And I think that at the end of her life, that's why she was writing so much, because she was returning to that understanding that she was at heart an artist, and all of the things she did, and her cooking and the way she could make plants grow She was an artist at the core.
And she didn't want that to
right?
be lost in motherhood and wifedom and whatever other labels she had to, carry and wear, right?
Absolutely. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And
All
those
right.
lessons are so clear now.
So you're a writer, you're a celebrated writer. Your name is tossed up there with some of the greats. So what's the new book? I know there's a new book.
There's a new book, and I tell you, I'm so excited about it. I actually was up this morning at 4:00 because I couldn't stop thinking about it.
Oh,
and I must say,
isn't that a good feeling?
oh, it's a great
that's
feeling.
how you know God is directing your steps. When you like you go to bed at night, you're like, oh, I have to get up because I have to work on this thing.
There's nothing better. And Toni Morrison said that when she was really in the flow, every emotion was useful. And she would say, oh, that's why this happened to me. That's why I experienced this. And everything is of use. And certainly in this book. So this book is called Unfinished Women.
Oh,
8 Lives.
I love it.
and what I'm interested in, and I've been interested in for a long time, is the way when it comes to Black people, memory is made. Who gets memorialized and why? And it sort of came to me, or one important stage in the understanding that this was the book I needed to write. I was judging a literary contest in biography, and that was a category. And we had a flood of books about and by exceptional white men. There was very few books by women, about women, and even fewer about Black people. I did not get, in my pile, I didn't get a single book. There wasn't a single book that we received that was written by an African-American person, which was itself distressing. And you wonder about so I learned to think about the kind of small p politics in the business of memorializing someone. It was fascinating to me. And we had a book that was written about a young Black man who was killed. And he was a young man. There was not time for him to build a life that might earn him a spot in an archive or library. And I started thinking about that, how we value lives, and how much the fact that we have so many books about these exceptional white men has to do in some ways purely with the resources, the archives that have been made to remember them. When it comes to, for instance, John Adams, federal monies have been devoted to the maintenance of that memory. But what about Zora Neale Hurston? How does a woman like that, who was a first in so many ways, I think the first Black woman, or second Black woman to win a Guggenheim Fellowship, how does she end up, sitting in Florida, cleaning houses? Her papers were burned after she died because there was no kind of awareness in the community of the stature she had in this kind of larger literary world. And so she was indigent when she died. And it was only because a friend of hers happened to be walking by, the oil drum where her papers were being burned, and said, wait a minute, this was an important person. So actually you can go down to the archives in Florida and see the singed edges.
Wow.
So, right? Isn't that fascinating? Chilling, really.
And I thought I knew a lot about Zora because I have a bunch of books on her because she's a personal hero, right? But I just learned something new.
But even that, to think about all the information about her now, so much of it is with us because of the women's movement, of Black feminist writers who made it their personal mission,
like Alice,
to get like Alice. Right? It was very important what she did. Yeah. She used her literary power to make us aware of Zora Neale Hurston, and who had always been an excellent writer. I mean, it wasn't about her literary productivity or the value of her books. It was about politics and social and cultural climates. You cannot control these things. And so I'm interested in that when it comes to the lives of Black women. And I'm interested in the unsung or undersung. So that I have a chapter on Zora Neale Hurston that's really about the creation of archives and who we remember and why, what it takes to reveal, to understand the mechanics behind that. There's also Gladys Bentley, who was just a fantastic figure, recently part of the New York Times, they're doing these obituaries of the unsung, who was a fantastic, mesmerizing performer in the 20s, 30s, 40s, but with the advent Black woman who sang the bawdiest blues. I mean, they would make you blush. Like, and she, people wrote about her in his autobiography. And it was that stunning. It was that unbelievable what she did, decked out in a top hat and tails, with the some beautiful woman on her arm, daring the public to say anything. But with the rise of McCarthyism, she had to shift gears. And one thing she did was she underwent conversion therapy.
Oh.
There's a painful, heartbreaking article in Ebony magazine from 1952 when she's in this just flowered dress, all of that grandeur, all of that mystery just stuffed into this dress. And she gets married, and I think the title of the article is I'm a woman again. And what I'm interested in that story is how she tried to pivot, and how does a woman like Gladys Bentley navigate this political repression? How do you keep making your art in the same way Freddie Washington, who shimmered in the 1934 version of Imitation of Life?
Yes.
She could not get work. Her career was really curtailed because of her skin color. She was too white looking for films about Black people, and she was too Black to play the roles being offered to white actors. So she started becoming a kind of watchdog of Hollywood and writing about representation in Hollywood. So I'm interested in these figures who've disappeared, because of, in some ways, our culture is not ready to remember them. They don't have narratives in some ways that have fit, American ideals about success. We love in this country to tell those stories, like the Bill Gates story. College dropout, now I'm rich and famous, as if that's that's a kind of upward climb to success. What about women who had to pivot and had to ride the waves of current politics and social orders? I'm interested in the everyday intimate choices that people make. I'm really interested to write about a woman who came back from a mistake.
Yeah.
How do you do that? How do you come back from a bad decision? All right. To me, that is something that to celebrate, to understand, to learn. I feel like I'm in a period of just remembering and listening. And I feel like it's really important to listen to our elders. And the older I get, the more I understand. Again, my mother's lessons, that I was too caught up, I was too wrapped up in myself to really understand what she was giving me, the gift of her longevity and broad vision. And so it's in honor, homage to these ancestors that I wish I'd listened to. I wish I'd taken a tape recorder and listened to my grandmother a little more carefully.
That's a Monday morning quarterback. Because that's not true. Fair. Because I think you did believe it or not, a lot of that probably did sink into you. A lot of it did get into your DNA, and a lot of it did. Because you know it, and you know where to look for it. So it didn't get past you,
That's true. I love
just
that.
Wish it could have been bigger, but it didn't get past you. It's giving you a foundation for the kind of work that you do and the way that you come to writing. I love that you are able to sort of give us some real personal, like you're in it when you tell these stories or when you share this work. Like I feel as though you're in it and you're happy to do it. You're not like just recording, or reporting. You're not just reporting. I think there's a difference there, like you're inviting us on a ride, and I'm so happy to sit in the front seat because it's
I
just
love it.
a beautiful thing. Really, I am one of the. This is why I dig you, because we are very similar in the romance of things. I think you're a very romantic person. I know I'm a very romantic person, but not like romantic in the ridiculous sense, but that we are interested in people's story and the long conversation. I am anyway. I love the long conversation with people.
Me too.
And it can be ongoing. Like, if I get off with you today, we can pick this up tomorrow, next week, next year. You know what I mean? So
absolutely.
I'm anxious about this book. So what has this book told you about what it is so far? Because everything will tell you what it wants to be, I think.
What's so exciting about this book? I really wanted to get all these women in the same room. so that there's someone like Zora Neale Hurston, but also this woman who I really admire. I think you would love her. Her name is Lucille Sargent. She lives here in Vermont, a Black woman who's lived here for 56 years. And I said to her recently, I said, you know, I feel so ambivalent about Vermont still. She said, Emily, I've lived here for, you know, a long time and I still feel ambivalent about Vermont. And so I was so interested in that. And I thought about, I'm interested in also finding out about Black woman expatriate. I want to know what that is like, to give up, to renounce American citizenship. But in some ways, my friend did that because she came from Virginia in a very tight Black community and moves up to Vermont, you know, and is married to a white man, gets married before interracial marriage is even legal. They meet in Montreal. And I was very interested in, you know, what that has been like. I mean, she's 80 years old. She's lived through a lot of iterations of Blackness. And I wanted to see what she has learned and what she sees from that, again, that broad lens. So I wanted to get these women in the same room to see what their lives had to say to each other. And what is exciting is that there are these interesting threads that you could follow in terms of, you know, and they really spent the lives, these women, their birth dates span a century, you know, from Zora was born 1891 and my oldest person, or I guess my youngest person, was born, you know, in the 50s. So I really wanted to hear from women who had lived a long life and had that broad, you know, I could see the broad view, but could look back and see over years about how their lives have changed and what they learned at various stages. So what is fascinating to me about the book so far and exciting are these tiny threads that connect them. Even though they're different professions, they live in different eras. I have two musicians, but they're Gladys and then Laverne Baker, who, you know, came to prominence in you know, mid-century. But it just goes to show you, you know, as human beings, our lives are so ordinary in some ways, you know, but also extraordinary. You know, there never have been a Babz and Emily having this conversation at any other point in time on the planet. And there never will be again. And that's just endlessly fascinating to me, the way that our experiences are so absolutely unique and yet so absolutely ordinary at the same time. And that's what I'm seeing in this book. But in the course of these women's lives, the issues they had to confront, so many similarities, and all of them are dealing with the body and the bodies they live in, and how that affects opportunity, how that affects how they can move in the world, the choices they make. All of them are negotiating in some ways with the, you know, the world of romance and how that affected what they wanted to do in life, whether or not that enhanced or derailed their visions. Mm-hmm. But they all came to what they wanted to do in the world at different moments in time, different sources of inspiration, but they're fundamentally human beings. And, you know, we have a lot to learn from their lives. I think hopefully readers will see themselves in lives of women they never imagined they could have any common ground with. But we are all human, and even more narrowly, Black women are negotiating the same sets of circumstances throughout time. You know, we have something in common with Harriet Jacobs, right, who was born into slavery and wrote this beautiful book, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. There actually are threads that connect our experience, you know, regardless of circumstance, regardless of how we came to negotiate our Americanness. And this book really is about women who've had to confront the American dream and find that it wasn't available to them, despite how hard they worked, despite their brilliance. And so you have to find another way to find yourself in this narrative. You know, sometimes you have to invent your role. And that's what I'm discovering.
True. Isn't it? But I think what I find fascinating about this is that that's still a true story on a lot of levels. Like that's still, like, if you pick somebody off the street now, that's still true, you know, like it's not 100 years ago. It's like yesterday. It's still true.
Absolutely.
So Emily, who do you like to read these days? What's on your nightstand?
Ooh, what's my nightstand? Right here, I'm so thrilled. I'm reading two books that I can't wait to read. Both of them I have to read because I'm reviewing them, but I picked the reviews so I could read them. There's one, my very good friend, Dawn Davis, who you both would adore each other. She just became the editor at Bon Appetit, the first Black woman ever.
Oh,
she's
yes.
a mover and a shaker.
Oh my God, I'd love to talk to her.
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. I think she should be in the show. She's fascinating and wonderful. And so, I mean, she's the same food group we belong to. And so I'm writing a blurb. This is her writer, Don't Let It Get You Down, essays on race, gender, and the body.
Oh.
Which is I'm excited about, and she's really excited about. So this is coming out Simon Schuster this summer, and I'm also reading Saidiya Hartman, who's I just stand in awe of her brain and her talent. This book, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments. I haven't read it yet, but I feel like this book is a friend to my book. Intimate Histories of Riotous Black Girls, Troublesome Women, and Queer Radicals. And it's a beautiful, imaginative history because she's also writing about women who didn't leave deep footprints in the world. And we have to imagine, right? And as Toni Morrison said, writing Beloved, that memory is an act of creation. It's an act of willed creation. And this book, it seems to me, is really riffing on that and playing with that idea. And she's just a beautiful writer. So I'm deep into this book. And I'm reading a lot about women. I'm going back, to those books. I've forgotten the author now. Her name, I'm going to remember it. When and Where Paula Giddings classic.
Oh yeah,
When and Where I Enter. Yes.
So goes the race.
Yes. And so I'm going back to these.
She's a Delta.
Classics.
That's so. I
love that.
Yeah. So I'm a fan of her. So
yeah.
So what's your guilty pleasure? What's a Emily Bernard guilty pleasure? And then we have to go because I know Harry's going to be like, you have to get off. But what's your guilty pleasure? Because
I'm going to scandalize you, and you're gonna shake your head. But I love me some Real Housewives. Let me tell you something. The Atlanta, of course, Housewives, and I always just I live in Vermont. I love seeing Black women. I mean, it's just as a concentrated.
Okay, I would have never picked that, Emily. Swear to God, I would have never picked it.
And just watching these beautiful women and conducting their lives sloppily and without apology is a nice vacation, and I just wonder at that, people's willingness to reveal themselves on camera, and I don't know, I find it fascinating. So.
Oh, I can't hear you. I lost you. I lost your volume. You disappeared. You're like, I can't hear you now. Oh, darn. Like something happened and you just.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Okay, there you go.
Okay. Okay, great. Sorry. My daughter called me and it came up on this thing.
Oh, I'm so glad I had this opportunity to talk to you.
Me too.
I adore you. I love your writing. I love your work. I'm looking forward to reading this new book that you put out. And I hope you come back when it's ready to hit the streets and talk more about it.
Absolutely.
And thank you for sharing your guilty pleasure.
I'll have to hear about yours, but I'll hear about it offline. But it's been a pleasure. And I just love seeing you again and having a chance to talk with you again. I just love everything about you.
Oh, you are the best. Thank you so much. Everybody, that's Emily Bernard. And she'll be back and read her books and read her work and pick up publications wherever she's writing. It's a wonderful book. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you, Babz.
Have a good one.
Until next time.
Yes. Thank you, Harry.
Thank you, Harry.
I got one more day, and then I'm out for medical leave.
Okay.
That was it for me.
Well,
and,
all right. Well, I'll catch up with you after, when you're in a different place and we can chat, just chat again. I'd love to talk with you again.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'll talk. All right. I'll see you again.
Thank you.
Good luck. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Too. Bye-bye. Thanks, Harry. Bye, everybody.